Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody.
Hey, hello now.
Good evening, Paul. Well, it's good afternoon to you. How are you
Yeah,
feeling today?
good. We had a nice vacation out in the wilderness of Utah and back home now for business. So,
Good. That sounds ominous. Okay, everybody. My name is Mandy Paul. I'm a spiritual medium and a healer. I'm also an out-of-body facilitator and a remote viewer. And this evening, I've got a lovely gentleman called Paul H. Smith, who I'm sure is going to explain who he is. So over to you, Paul.
okay. Well, for the folks who've heard of remote viewing, which is probably quite a few these days, I was one of the original government or U.S. military remote viewers. I was in the what's become known as the Stargate remote viewing program for 7 years. I teach a version of remote viewing called controlled remote viewing. It was the one that was developed by the people who created remote viewing in the first place. And I've been teaching that for, well, since 1984, however many years that is. It may be more than I want to admit. But I'm a retired Army military intelligence officer, Desert Storm veteran, and after I retired from the military, I both started up my commercial remote viewing training business, and I also got a PhD in philosophy, or as my wife says, unemployment. Now, we
I
are
like it.
settled in Utah, in southern Utah, in the middle of a whole bunch of national parks. It's gorgeous here, and I train people here.
I think I'm going to have to make a trip to Utah when I can.
You
Or should I?
should.
Or should I just come remotely?
It's not nearly as much fun remotely.
No, I dare say it's better in person.
Yeah.
Okay, Paul. I suppose you know a lot about the document that was released recently. Well, it's not been recently released. It's just been aware of. Yeah, we'll do some hellos. Okay.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. Okay. Hi, Lisa. How are you?
Howdy. And
Mary
Mary Dick.
Dixie.
Hello.
Hello. Good evening.
And Spirit of Love. That's the interesting middle name of. That's easy to spell.
Amanda.
Amanda.
Ah, lovely. Hello, Amanda. How are you?
Heidi.
Evening, all.
Queenie Aura. All right. Sharon Hughes. Ah, hello, Sharon. Joe Stainsby. Tony Lazard. And Catherine Coppin from the UK. Okay. Amy White. Howdy. Lee Barber. Interesting photo. Brooklyn White. Ah,
I can't see the image. Oh, there you go. Hello, Mr. and Mrs. B. Hi. Hello. How can I get it on the right view?
and Aquileo. Interesting name.
Acroyo. Oh,
Hello. And Lauren.
Lauren.
Jilly Bean. That's nice. Hello.
Hello. I've heard that name before.
Ryan.
Oh, there you go. From Scotland. Hello, Lacey. How are you?
I was just in Scotland a year ago, September. Direct Perception. This is Russell. Hello, Russell.
Hello, Russell. Liz
Liz.
Hardy O'Flynn.
Okay. Hello from Hello to Oxford, I guess, right?
Oxford, yes.
I've seen you before. Hello. Terry.
Terry. Hello, Terry. We will, yes. Hello to everybody. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Okay. So, Paul, the theme of this program is that I've been on this show a couple of times, and I don't know, I only realised recently about that document that was released on the 9th of June in 1983 from the Department of the Army. And it mentions about, the Gateway Program and out-of-body experiences. Now, obviously, you're familiar with that because you did an interview, like you said recently, with Gaia TV. The being with that is an out-of-body experience, which we all have these experiences at some point in our lives, but sometimes we're not aware that they actually are out of bodies. Now, I've been given opportunity for people to have an out-of-body experience without sound, and I've been able to meet up with a family that has passed over and have the conversation themselves with the consciousness of the person that's passed. Now, when I've been reading this document, it put some clarification in when it mentions about clicking out. I actually call it popping, stepping, or slipping out. But that's just me as a person when I have an out of body. But with the frequency, which I've been doing for many people from all over the world, experiencing, being a medium also, having the communication with a family member for themselves through telepathic conversations that they've been having with their family. So when I was reading this document about Elmer and Alice from the Monroe Institute, I mean, it's dated back some time, they were talking about the Gateway Program, and obviously which is hemisync, and allowing, depending on the amount of time that you've actually meditated, and obviously the Gateway Program together. So what was happening is that I stumbled across it in the past 5-6 years or so, where not only was I able to come out of my body, travel to the destination where the person who I was sat with to go to and meet up with their family and have the conversations themselves. Now, I know most people listen to CDs and such things, like you say, from the Gateway Program, and then Scott Taylor does various CDs there, but there is actually no sound when this is actually happening. And the reports and the testimonies from these people, theoretically, they actually blow me away because of what they experienced. Now, a couple of months ago, I gave this experience to a gentleman in Florida, and he said it was just like the experience that he watched in the film Contact. Now, I just wonder if you could spread some light on that, Paul.
So, yeah, let me add a couple things first. So the term clicking out, that's actually a term Bob Monroe, who founded the Monroe Institute and essentially discovered hemisync, right?
Yeah.
He came up with that term. And it's also important to make a distinction that remote viewing and out-of-body experiences are two distinct things. Okay, they are not the same thing at all. Now, the term out-of-body experience actually was coined to describe what Monroe did. Charles Tart, research psychologist, retired from the University of California system, and he's quite well known by people involved in the world of intuition and consciousness research and such. He's the one that came up with that term, trying to come up with a way of describing what it was that Bob Monroe himself was experiencing. Okay. So, yeah. So with that as a background, now I lost track of your question. What were you asking?
I was asking how it is explained, because I mean, obviously, when Bob Monroe did have out, but I put it this way: I did the Gateway Program 11 years ago when it first started to be explored in the UK. And I did it over a 10-week period. Obviously, things are a lot quicker now, and I think it's a weekend program that you can do at the Monroe Institute. Well, but since then, things just seem to escalate, and the frequency changed. And obviously, I continue to meditate, which I have done for like 20, 25, 26 years now. And I was talking to a Buddhist monk. I know it's a tangent, but he was telling me that by able to actually go into places and in remote viewing, if you will, to go to a place and actually see what's in that room where somebody sat, and to retrieve that information, he put it down to 0 point energy. Now, apparently, that's what all Buddhist monks aspire to, actually reach that frequency, able to do so they can send out healing or what they want to do in the world, to whom and where and such. When it comes with the remote viewing scenario, is the people who've had these experiences say to me that they went here, they met them there, and they had this conversation. Now, I'm sat there in awe thinking, well, how can that be? So I just presume with the remote viewing scenario, obviously I've done remote viewing, and I have worked with Joe and such at the Monroe, but the experiences that they actually tell me about, it's mind-blowing, literally. So when you were saying about the clicking out, that he honed in on that term, I did an experiment. I was in the UK, and somebody sorry.
Interruption. We have a question from a viewer who wants to know what remote viewing is. Shall I explain?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So remote viewing is actually a skill that builds on an underlying ability all of us have, and that is to be psychic. All of us can be psychic. We just recognize we have that ability. Our modern society doesn't necessarily endorse that idea, right? So remote viewing is a skill that was developed by the military, originally created by a researcher named Ingo Swann. Then the CIA got interested. I won't tell that whole backstory. It's a very interesting thing, but it's fairly complicated. It was developed for the use of the military and the intelligence community. And it's essentially, I describe it as a kind of a disciplined clairvoyance, although that's a overly simplistic way of describing it, because it involves more than just viewing, more than just visual. It involves all the senses. So I actually prefer to call it, when I don't have to explain it to a large group of people who understand it as remote viewing, I like to describe it as remote perception. Essentially, you're perceiving at a distance. It's a form of extrasensory perception. It's quite disciplined. And one of the things that it develops is this idea of managing mental noise. A lot of people who are involved in being psychic, and actually do have some ability at that, oftentimes come up with wrong answers. And the reason is because they don't recognize that there's this thing called mental noise going on in our heads. It's essentially all the guesses and memories and all of that kind of stuff that our left brain generates. One of the main features of remote viewing training is teaching you how to identify what that mental noise is and separating it out from the actual signal, the real information that's coming in, which is generally speaking quite subtle and quite hard to detect if you don't recognize that there's this distinction. So a very quick down and dirty discussion of remote viewing. If you can access my book, The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing, in which I go into much more detail explaining the differences and all of that kind of thing. So
it's a very interesting book, because I'm reading that at the moment, Paul. It is a very interesting book. I just love how you break it down to be easily understood and practiced.
Thank you.
Oh, I can see that one. Sorry, total novice here. What is? Oh, I can see the question now from Heidi. We're having a few issues here, Heidi, with the screen, so don't worry. I've seen your message now. So, did Paul answer your question, Heidi? I hope so, because I answered probably a lot of people's questions there. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if anybody's got any questions, that's fine. Just to post them up on the screen, so either me or Paul can answer those questions for you. Also, Paul, I wanted to ask you. I saw a documentary about you where you was able to locate. I think it was something on a channel that I watched where you located somebody that was missing.
Okay.
I can't remember which program I saw it on. So that as a perception of knowing and feeling and sensing where this person was. Obviously, when you talked about the time difference of when they actually were found, I think you said it was 15 hours, I think they stated. Is that a specific time that's the distance of knowing when and where they are? Or is that, because that was a very similar time, 15 hours for when I found somebody missing also. And I'm just wondering, does it tie in, or is it just a natural occurrence?
I'm wondering if you're thinking of something Joe McMoneagle did. That's not sounding familiar to me.
Mm.
It may have been something Joe did. He was actually is pretty good at finding people. He's done it for Japanese TV. American TV really doesn't give him the chance to do it, but the Japanese really are quite interested, and he's had quite a bit of success doing that. Um, so yeah, so I really can't respond in detail.
Yeah.
I have done obviously some. Well, I won't say obviously. Nobody knows this, but I've done some remote viewings that were quite successful into the future.
Okay.
And that's really my best ever, most successful military remote viewing was actually against a target to an event that didn't happen until 50 hours later. And it was totally accurate, what I described. So, anyway, Brooklyn is asking, can this happen in dreams? And yes, dream ESP is a fairly common thing. People report about it. J.B. Rhine, who started scientific parapsychology, his daughter, Sally Rhine Feather, has written a book called The Gift that talks a lot about that. I highly recommend that book. It talks about a lot of the dream ESP that occurs, and lots of people report that. Even when they don't think they're psychic at all, something important happens. Sometimes it isn't even important. Something happens. They have these precognitive dreams, what we call it, and then they're totally surprised when all of a sudden it happens, like the next day or a week later.
Yeah.
It is a common thing. It's really quite cool when it happens.
That's something else when you said about the dream state. 'Cause obviously, you're not conscious or aware of that. You're in your dream state, yes, which is probably a delta frequency. When these people have had these out of bodies with me, they're conscious of it. So they're between alpha and theta state. So it's obviously a higher frequency. This is what I've been told about it. Because the experiment we did, this is why I went to the Monroe Institute with Joe a couple of years ago, because my friend was there that I'd met a good few years earlier in Holland. And we did an experiment where she was in the Monroe and I was at home, and we did a view of what we could see. And the trainer that was with her at the time asked her what she could see and what I could see, and the accuracy that I gave about the Monroe Institute. She stated you need to get her here for this remote viewing course. Now, I mean, it really surprised me on what I was able to see in great detail. And so then the question was I there consciously? Was I there out of body? Or is that, like you state, about the extrasensory perception?
And the answer is yes. It could be
Okay.
any of those. We don't really technically, when you get right down to it, we don't know, right?
Yeah.
It's something, it's one of those, but which one? I don't know, or maybe it's all of them.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about Buddhist monks, for example, with their frequency, which have been tested many and many a time, because obviously they sit in meditation for hours and hours, and obviously their frequency has been tested and tried and so forth. But the other question also is, do you actually, possibly a personal question, meditate yourself?
I've never had the practice of meditating. The controlled remote viewing methodology I use actually kind of induces a mild meditative state by the time you're done. You start off being just, I like to say, stone cold sober, right? You're sitting in a room with a stack of paper and a pen, and then you go through this process. By the time you're done with a session, which could be anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on what the goal of the session is. By the time you get done with a session, particularly one of these long ones, you're really kind of floaty, you're in this altered state. But it's just a mild one. It's not like you're profoundly out of it, but you are out of it to some degree. And the process is what gets you there, I think.
Yeah. I think that's the focus, isn't it? Because focusing on something intentionally brings into, yeah.
One thing you see about meditation is that scientific research has shown that people who are meditators tend to be more successful as remote viewers. So that's, I think, an important thing for people to take away.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Like I say, I think to be honest, Paul, I think remote viewing should be put into schools as another language.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be really benefit children in the long term.
Yeah, a lot of people think that, and I agree it ought to be mainstreamed, but there are more people who disagree with that, unfortunately.
Well, it's a bit like hieroglyphics, isn't it? I mean, the Egyptians did reading. You could read through images. So I guess it's just another language that could be learned for children. I mean, they do algebra at school. I mean, they don't probably use that again in the future, but I dare say remote viewing would be used on many of things for the future.
I think it's actually its value is in helping us develop a more comprehensive connection with our intuition, with applied consciousness, with non-local perception, right? Because it's very much resident in the right brain. Um, Things like languages and mathematics and all that stuff, that's more of a left brain operant kind of thing. And unfortunately, or, well, it's just the way humans are. Our left brains tend to be the sources of the mental noise, right? So we don't think of it as a language in those terms. It's more of an experiential, intuitional kind of an experience that you just learn how to recognize, acknowledge, and then debrief or objectify, get it out there where other people can see what it is you're perceiving to the extent that's possible, right?
Yeah. I think it would be very interesting, like you say, for children and for everybody to actually practice or practice remote viewing on a daily basis. I mean, I practice every day. I'm practicing with a gentleman in Ohio. Every day we do something every other day. Should I say not every day, every other day? And obviously, I meditate most days. But the other thing being with that is I feel it sharpens the mind also, and
Mm.
I feel like it gives you access to lots of information that you would not know that you had.
It's interesting in a way. It kind of harmonizes with the hemisync process. So in
Yes.
hemisync, the idea is to get your two hemispheres working together, your two brain hemispheres working together, and it seems to do that quite well. um, Learning remote viewing allows your right brain, and again, if there's any psychologists out there, I realize I'm speaking very simplistically about right brain, left brain, but it's easier to understand this way, right? So it's a way to help our right brains kind of emerge. They generally, particularly in Western society, tend to be oppressed or suppressed by our left hemispheres. Our left hemispheres dominate for very good reasons. They do, but the more we are able to kind of get those two hemispheres working together instead of the left one dominating, the broader the spectrum, the broader our horizons are in our everyday lives, how we interact and that kind of thing. So yeah, it practicing this develops things that normally don't get developed in our culture.
Yes. I do feel that the Indians, the Native Americans, Indians, they have this ability. I mean, the Navajo Codebreakers had this innate ability also. And I think that, like I say, it's been lost. I feel like it's been lost. Whereas children, when they're children, they have no fear of anything because obviously they're young and they're out there and they're doing what they need to be doing. But then obviously when they go to mainstream school, I feel that there's something there that changes the perception of a child's mind. That's my opinion. But I feel that if they were in schools where they could actually be taught it in a maybe more in a simpler explanation on how to, would really benefit children in the long run. I mean, obviously that's my opinion. I don't know anybody else's questions out there. Would they be interested in their child practicing remote viewing? If you want to send
You
some
know,
questions,
that would be a great question. There was one that was up here and it's now been replaced, so we probably ought to address it before it disappears altogether.
I can't see it.
So how is remote viewing used by the military? And to what use, right? So first off, it isn't being used by the military anymore. At the end of the Cold War, they declassified the program and canceled it. But when we were doing it, we used it to try and find Western hostages in the Middle East, in the Bekaa Valley, who'd been kidnapped by Hezbollah or whoever. We used it to spy on the Chinese nuclear program and the Pakistani nuclear program, also, by the way. Um, Soviet research and development program, Soviet troop deployment, political things that the Soviet Union was involved in. We used it in trying to locate in the war on drugs, narcotic shipments, drug traffickers, and we had quite a bit of success in that respect. So just about any kind of an intelligence problem that the military might have, we used remote viewing on at one time or another. Now, obviously, it wasn't the main go-to in the intelligence world. They tried all of the other ones first, the signals intelligence, the human intelligence, the satellites, all that. They tried all that first. If they couldn't answer the question using that, then they came to the remote viewers and said, okay, you're our last ditch hope. Can you help us with this problem? Right. And generally speaking, it was kind of a laundry list of all the intelligence activities that you might expect. We even were tasked to try and find moles, KGB moles in the CIA, and we actually accurately described one sufficiently that they could have caught him, except that they didn't believe our report.
Oh my!
Caught him. You go back and see. Oh yeah, we did actually give him enough information they could have caught him if they had paid attention to us.
Okay, so gallery view. Let's have a look. Where do I find that? Oh, there we go. Grid view. Let's have a look. It's grid view. Let's have a look. Oh, there we go. Grid view. There you go. I'm on grid view now. I don't know how to get that one off now then. Okay. Right, okay. Oh, there. Oh, I can see him now, yeah. I used to have OBEs, just happened, but can't bring them to experience it myself. It's more if I'm tired. And it's how to do this naturally. Chile. To do it naturally, basically, is you have to. I actually use the technique of surrendering first of all. Okay, because obviously there's a lot of restrictions in everyday life. Okay, and the thing having these restrictions, there is a lot of fear about out of body experiences. The people, like I say, when I've done these out of body experiences with people, as I call myself a facilitator, is their first instinct is what will happen when I leave my physical vessel. Yeah. So then they get this fear sets in and they stop and they don't do it. But when they do it the second time, they realize that by coming out, they're not going to go and literally die. They're having an experience of how it will feel when you die. It sounds really quite ironic, but the feeling is a wonderful experience. But to practice it's when it's ready for you to have. Okay. I've been having them since I was about 13 years of age. And I used to just lay on my bed at home. And then I obviously, with the surrendering situation, I obviously didn't use that term as a child. I used to just lay there and just allow myself to feel light. I asked myself, so you're talking to your etheric self. So you've got your physical vessel and you've got your etheric self, which is based on light. So you basically say to yourself, I'm allowed to come out. I am allowed to come out of my body. Okay. So what you could practice that is before you go to sleep, first of all, before you go to sleep at night time, say to yourself, I surrender for first instance. And then by surrendering, you are allowing yourself to come out every night anyways. Okay. But what will happen is when you start doing that, say like 3 or 4 days of so, it'll become a natural feeling. So then once you have this natural feeling, you will know what it feels like to come out of your body. All right. But it'll all determine whether you feel comfortable with that. So the practicing, yeah, try it. Just lay there and just say, I allow myself to come out my physical vessel. Crystals are quite an interesting, also which you can do grids under your bed or anything else like that, which will help the more of a comforting scenario for your etheric self. And it's not trusting, you're actually trusting yourself. So you have to trust yourself and knowing that you're going to be fine when you do come out of your body. So you won't actually die because it's not your time. When it's your time, it's your time. But when you literally feel yourself coming out of your body, don't resist that feeling. There's nothing to be afraid of. This is what people initially do with the frequency, allow them to come out the physical vessel. And some people actually feel like they're feeling elongated, first of all. And they feel like sticky toffee, they say to me, because they can feel themselves stretching, but they just don't want to, they're resisting that letting go. It's literally letting go. It's like when you go on a roller coaster and all your friends are egging you on, come on, you'll love it. And you're really apprehensive and you're finally getting on it and you're actually on this roller coaster and you're nearly ready to break down, yeah? And as soon as you've been on it, you get off and you want to get back on it. So this is what it's about. Some people feel like this sticky toffee sometimes. That's what some experiences, and some of them are Velcro, or they really don't want to let go of the unknown, if you will. It's a letting go of the unknown. But that's sometimes the best way to experience it. So I hope that answers your question a little bit, Jilly. If you want to get in touch, like I say, I'm on Facebook. Hello, Kate. How are you? This is my friend, Paul, lovely Kate Green, if you want to answer her question.
So, people who have brain injuries. So, first of all, I don't know that I've worked with very many at all who have brain injuries. Okay. See if I find a lot of people who have brain injuries are able to remote view more easily. And she has had a brain operation, and since then she's incorporated into her everyday life. So I haven't had many folks with. In fact, I'm not even sure I've had any that have brain injuries or brain surgery. I actually had one, but that was after he went through my class. And my inclination depends on what the injury is, or it depends on what the surgery is. I could see that in some cases it would enhance the faculty. In other cases, it might detract from it. I do know I've had a couple of folks who've had adult onset ADD, and that has made it life rough for them in trying to remote view. Of course, it's harder for folks like that to kind of focus and to really relax in the way you need to relax in order to allow the signal to come in and to recognize it. I don't think it's a one-shot answer here. I think it really depends on what the brain injury, what the brain problem, what the psychological problem is. Some things work to help, some things don't. I know there's been some research into how to say this, into like mental issues that people have, for example, schizophrenia, and how it affects ESP. And some of the indications are interesting. They seem to suggest that schizophrenics, at least some subset of them, do seem to have a increased ability to be psychic. The problem is that because of all the other stuff that's going on in their heads, it makes it very hard for them to derive accurate experiences from that being psychic mode. So there's trade-offs. The same thing with substances. People want to know, well, do psychedelics enhance being psychic? And the answer is they may. There seems to be some indication from some research that they do, but they also enhance the noise dramatically. And so you may have a better ability to be psychic, but you also have a whole lot more noise to contend with that you have to sort out. And so it may come out a wash in the end, where you're better at being psychic, but you also have more of an obstacle at being psychic. So, I don't know. That's probably more of an answer than you needed, but that's, I think, the best that anybody could say about this at the moment.
Thank you, Kate. Very interesting subject, that, Paul, about when you say about the people with schizophrenia or ADHD or autism for that matter. Because I went to with one of the trainers once called Luigi, who does the Gateway program, and he works on the lucid dreaming. He stated that he doesn't do this program with people who have ADHD or autism. But one of my friends came along with us at this time because he wanted to experience it. And he had an out-of-body experience and thought he was Superman. He was flying around like he was Superman. He just couldn't believe it. And he didn't even state to this guy that he was autistic. He just went in and did with the Hemisync CDs and such things. And he thought it was wonderful. He'd never had an experience like it. But he did state that he didn't even ask him. He just went ahead and did it. And he absolutely loved it. So it's an interesting question when you state about the brain and how it can actually interact and help with the remote viewing faculty, really. Oh, who's this question? Not sure if this question will offend, but is the film The Men Who Stare at Goats a good representation of fact?
And the answer is no. Although I found the film very amusing, and it actually is more honest than the book it's based off of. The book portrays itself as absolute fact. It is not. The movie says more of this is true than you might think, which I thought was a fairly accurate way of stating it. The problem with both book and movie is that they conflate two things that had absolutely nothing to do with them. So there's a thing called psychological operations in the military. And that's all propaganda. It's all manipulating people's minds, that kind of thing. Not in the sense of the way we do it with most of our media, in interrogation techniques, that kind of thing. That's all psychological operations. But that's way different than what you might call parapsychological operations, which is what I was involved in. In other words, remote viewing, trying to use mental processes to perceive things at a distance that are important for the defense establishment, whatever. They're completely different things. And unfortunately, John Ronson, in both film and book, squished them together in a way that's totally inaccurate. And a lot of the stuff he portrayed in the part that was more related to the remote viewing program was also either exaggerated or fictional. For example, the thing of people staring at goats and making them die, so far we've been able to find no evidence that ever actually happened. It's based on a story that somebody told that could produce no evidence. And in fact, there were some things about it that suggested the story was made up. Yet Ronson picked it up. Of course, it isn't an attention-getting thing. So from that perspective, it made him a lot of money, right? But there's no evidence that anybody ever stared a goat to death. And it's just, I don't know, a cult. Well, whatever. I can't think of the right word to put in there, but it was a gimmick to sell the book, I think, basically.
Yeah. Interesting question, Lenny. Paul, have you watched the documentary Lance, The Third Eye Spies?
Yes.
It's a very interesting concept. And I feel that that's probably going to be in the future, maybe. Gillian Morrison, you explain how to come out of your body, but what do you do to return to your body? Okay. When I come out of my body and I travel where I need to travel to, I could come to your house if you like, Gillian, and sit with you. The thing being with that is when I come out of my body, it just feels very natural. It's as though it's something that we all actually have the ability to do so, but it's up to us if we choose to. When I come out of my body and then I know it's time to return, I come back into my body as easily as I've gone out. This one instance, like I say, when I came out of my body, when I take you on a journey with me, and we don't go to the destination I choose to go to, you go to yours. For example, a gentleman who came out of his body. First time he tried it, he didn't feel very comfortable with it. He could feel himself lifting out of his body, but then he resisted. Obviously, that's the fear base. So then the second time he did, he came out of his body and he'd lost his son. So not only did he meet up with his son, he met up with his father. When I'm out of this body with you are about 10 feet away from me. And I'm just like a link, if you will. I'm like the link. So it's like two atoms. It's like two bubbles together, just stretched slightly till you have this conversation with your family member who that person is. And then when it's time to come back, some people resist sometimes. Because what you got to realize is the love for somebody who's passed over is going to be the same love for somebody who's here. Yeah, so you just need that in between state. So you've got the two atoms, if you will, that's in conjunction with each other. I call them bubbles. It makes it easy to say, but you're just connected. Okay, so then when it's time for you to come back, because obviously you've given the answers that you received from who you needed to receive them from, have that conversation, and then it's time to come back. Some people resist. And I say, I'll give you 5 more minutes, which 5 more minutes seems hours. Yes. So then when you do come back, you'll say, well, can we do it again? And you want you to do it again. And the thing being with that is because you actually have tapped into a frequency in there that's extremely high. And it's like a buzz feeling that you get. And people who have had this experience 2, 3, 4 days later, their life's totally and utterly changed. And they've been able to stream information extremely quickly. Obviously, that's because they've come out of their physical vessel and they've learned what they needed to learn while they was out. So it is very easily when they do come back. But I have had a few people that's resisted. I hope that answers your question, Gillian. So, Paul, I think you need to experience this.
What's that?
An out-of-body experience with me.
Well, so consciously, I have not experienced one, but I kind of suspect I have sleep. And that's one thing Bob Monroe said. He said that that people oftentimes, when they're asleep, have these out-of-body experiences and go to different locales and stuff. But when they wake up, they're not conscious of it. And one of his claims of fame, I wanted to respond to this anyway. Earlier, somebody mentioned about, I think it was Jilly, mentioned that she often has these spontaneous out-of-body experiences. She doesn't even intend to do it, and it happens. And that's actually how Bob Monroe started out. He started having these things happen to him, and he had no idea what was going on. And then he got together with Charles Tard, and they did some work back and forth on it, and they sort of figured out the parameters of it. And from that point on, then Bob experimented and found out what worked and what didn't work, and came to the point where, at least to some degree, he can control when he went out of his body, and even apparently some degree where he went, whatever going somewhere means in this context, right? So, interestingly enough, I'm a Mormon, which is a nickname for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So most people know the term Mormon, right?
That's quite interesting you said that, Paul, because the Mormons originated from the village that I live in Chapman. And they come here every year for a pilgrimage.
Well, I think you might be talking about somebody else. Mormon started in New York, but Joseph Smith was the founder of it. But whatever. A lot of the early members of the church actually came from England, so maybe it had to do with that.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing was the second president of the church, the second prophet of the church, was Brigham Young. Most people have heard of Brigham Young in one way or another. Maybe it was his multiple wives, who knows, right? but Brigham Young once talked about out-of-body experiences, and he said that most of us have out-of-body experiences when we're asleep. He didn't have that term. This was long before the term was developed, but he said we're asleep, we go to sleep physically, and then spiritually we come alive, and are essentially spirits, I don't recall the exact word he used, travel to these other domains where we learn. It's like a spiritual school that we learn while we're asleep. And it's quite interesting when I came across that. I'm thinking, okay, Brigham Young is talking about stuff that I'm familiar with. Whether or not I do it, I'm probably one of the ones that does it when I'm asleep. I don't know.
That's the other thing. They're not asleep. They're consciously aware of it. And this is the difference, I feel. It's quite interesting, really, when I get the testimonials. We've got a question here. Keep it real, spiritual, and paranormal. Is it possible to remote view while wide awake and aware, or do I need to be in a trance-like state? My only experience was awake, but you then wonder if it was your imagination.
Yes, and in fact, the kind of remote viewing I teach, in fact, most of the remote viewing that was done, no matter what the approach that was used in the military and in the government program, was done from an awake state. You start off awake, but as you get deeper into it, you kind of get into this mild altered state of consciousness. There was one variety that we did called extended remote viewing, in which the viewer laid on a bed and tried to establish a mind-awake, body-asleep state, so a kind of a trance state. And we used actually hemisync signals up through stage focus 12 to help us achieve that state. And then while we're in this hypnagogic state, as it's called, the interviewer would come in and sit down and start asking questions about the target. We've talked about Joe. We're talking about Joe McMoneagle is who we're talking about. He was one of the earliest Army remote viewers, and he used ERV back then. This extended remote viewing as a practice, and some of his absolute best sessions were done using this mode. He did some amazing, amazing stuff.
Focus 12, did you say?
Well, Focus 12, but then they turned it off for the actual remote viewing process. Yeah.
That's what we did when we went to when I went to the Monroe Institute. Yeah. But I was fortunate enough to reach Focus 49.
Yeah, they kept expanding. When I was there, 21, I think, when I went through, 21 was the farthest up they got. And of course, so when you took the remote viewing course there, did you take the Monroe Institute, Monroe Institute remote viewing program? Did you do that?
I did that, yeah, with Joe. I was invited to go from the lady.
Okay, so it was one of Joe McMoneagle's. You were there after Skip Atwater had retired, then, I presume.
Yeah, it was 2019 when I went to 2019. Yeah, with Joe, it was 6 days, six 10-hour intensive days. I'll be fair.
Yeah, keep you busy.
It took me 3 months to process when I got home. It was very interesting, and I was actually up for the experiment for the copper cube there, for the flotation tank. but they'd got all the participants. But because I did the Gateway program, which you're only allowed to go into the tank when you've done the Gateway program, which I did obviously 10 years earlier, and it was absolutely amazing. I thought it was fantastic, and literally, as she said, I couldn't go any higher than 27. But as I got into there, she took me to 49, which I felt really privileged to be able to go to that state of consciousness and awareness, if you will. So it was very interesting. So has anybody got any more questions about the Monroe Institute or remote viewing? There you go, Paul.
Yeah, it is ERV. And hello, I don't know if this is Theo or Jana. The Psi unit is a German remote viewing concern, and they're doing good work over there. Is ERV or extended remote viewing similar to an out-of-body experience? I would say it's not. It's in an out-of-body experience. So maybe I should explain the difference between remote viewing and out-of-body experience. So they're probably related in some way, but they're like on opposite ends of a spectrum, right? So in out-of-body experience, you feel literally like whatever element it is of you has left your body behind. Your body's just a shell, and whatever it was that was occupying the shell has gone. You could call it a spirit. We could call it your astral body. There's lots of different terms for it. And frankly, we don't know what it is, but the experience.
I call it the etheric body. Sorry, I call it the etheric body. You could call it that,
sure. Yeah. Whatever it is, the experience is as if you as a whole entity of some sort is actually going somewhere. You feel like you're traveling there in whatever sense traveling makes in this kind of experience. In remote viewing, you are always aware of being right where you are. You are consciously aware that, yes, I'm present in this room, or yes, I'm laying on this bed. But you also recognize that you're having conscious experiences at some place that is separate from where you are. Okay. So it's really different. In one place, you feel like you're all there. In the other situation, you recognize that you're in one place, but that you're being able to remotely understand, experience, detect what's at the location that you've been targeted on. So it's a very distinct, experientially different kind of experience. Okay. Now in ERV, it's probably possible that someone in an ERV situation could perhaps even experience an out-of-body experience. However, that would be counterproductive to what the goal of remote viewing is. The goal of remote viewing is to actually bring back information that can be of use. And if you're having a full out-of-body experience, you're not writing, you're not sketching, you're not talking, you're just there having this full experience. And so you're dependent on what you remember of it when you come back to try and capture that. And usually, as we know, memory isn't perfect. And so oftentimes you may leave out important pieces of information. Now, if you want to experience out-of-body, that's great. But don't conflate the remote viewing and the out-of-body thing, because they each have different purposes. They have different goals. And if you conflate them, then you kind of undermine the goals for each of them. It can undermine the experience.
So is there any chance you could actually bring them together in unison, like you mentioned on the spectrum?
Yeah, and I don't think
together.
Yeah, I don't think that's desirable, actually.
No.
And I'm not sure that you could, because there reaches a point where you click, right? You click out and poof, you're in an out-of-body state.
Yes.
And you've left the remote viewing functionality behind. Or if you try and become more of a remote viewer in an out-of-body thing, you will then click back in and you won't be out-of-body anymore. So I don't know if it's possible to combine them, but I don't think it's even desirable to do that. I think that each is a special tool in its own right, and you use whatever tool it is to accomplish the ends that you have for that particular experience.
Interesting. So we are both here.
They are both there. All right. Hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody. So you knew these are, Paul? You knew who the unit is?
Yeah, I know them.
Good. I hope they're enjoying the program. I watched the films Flatliners about out-of-body experience. Hello, Tony. I have not actually watched that film. Have you watched that film, Paul?
I can't remember if I watched the whole thing. I know I've seen parts of it when it was on TV. And of course, that's a more of a nightmarish thing. We look at out of body experience and remote viewing as a positive experience.
Yeah.
Flatliners, it was a really dark kind of an experience. But of course, they were in that film. The premise was that they were inducing these out of body experiences by bringing people essentially over the edge to death and then reviving them. Right.
Right. Okay.
So it presented, I think, kind of a negative image of all of this. From what I recall, it's been a long time.
I suppose that, Tony, basically with this out-of-body experience that I offer to people is that it takes the fear away of dying. So it gives you an opportunity to experience it, but to come back and to recall.
Well, this movie would have given you a fear of dying.
Yeah, well, there you go. Okay, that's probably what the film.
At least as I remember it, and maybe I'm not being fair, but what I remember, that's how I would say it. Yeah.
Okay, Aquilio, do you have the ability to use remote viewing to visit past traumatic events within an individual to help them heal and live a more balanced and peaceful life? Yes. The ability.
I want to be a little cautious with that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it means by within an individual, right? I think that the event would be an external thing. It would seem to me that they could revisit the external event, and that would make more sense. You don't get inside yourself in a remote viewing experience.
No, but the out of body, you when you have this out of body there, you do visit, or you have visited people who have caused these traumatic events and have the conversations with them to heal yourself from them. Yes. And then it becomes, Yeah,
I think it could be therapeutic in some form. I don't know that it's been actually researched or pursued to see how to use it in context. I mean, remote viewing is essentially a brand new field, even though it's been around for a while. It's still, in terms of science, a brand new field. It's not accepted by the mainstream. So even though I've had several PhD psychologists come who love it, the vast majority of the psychology world wants to keep it at arm's length. They're worried that it'll undermine their credibility if they take it seriously. So I think that it could plausibly help. Whether or not anyone's tried it, I don't know.
No, but like I say, with the out of body, they've had a balanced and more peaceful life, which state there again in the testimonial. So, yeah, it needs to be addressed, I suppose, and to get it out there more and more for people to understand. And I feel like you say with the remote viewing, Paul, it's a really unique opportunity for people to tap into their intuition and to have more of an understanding of themselves. But also, like you state, with targets and such, which are used for the military. And I dare say now with the targets that you use now, which you do use on your page, is more of like I say, it's like a challenge, and it's not as so much as a traumatic target that they're viewing.
Right.
Yeah,
the goal with those targets is to help people develop their skills.
Yes.
Once they've developed a good, sound foundation in basic remote viewing of just real world targets of various kinds, once they have actually anchored that and gotten proficient at that, then they can expand it and explore some of these more, more tenuous is not the word, more intangible kinds of things, right?
Yes, I understand that one. I hope that answered your question, Aquilio. Samantha Lawrence, I was 14 and went from a dream into a corner of a ceiling, seeing with clear vision and shaking. This went on for a few minutes. Was this out of body or remote view? I was aware.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that was more of possibly an out of body experience. And to see yourself on the bed, I presume, you was looking down at yourself thinking, why am I down there when I'm up here? Okay, and I feel that with that, you could actually not physically, your physical body was, I actually call it the quantum field, whereas your consciousness or your etheric body was just out of your body looking back at yourself. And for that reason is because you allowed yourself to leave your physical vessel and look back at yourself. And for whatever reason that was at that time at 14, you was, whatever was happening in that daytime or something you felt that you needed to come out of your body to just prove that you can. this is another thing. Obviously, being at 14 years of age, you're going through different times when you're in your teens, and it's a whole new world, I feel, when you're going through your teenage years. But to see yourself from the ceiling and looking back at yourself, you might have had that fear moment thinking, why am I up here when I should be down there? And you might have actually thought to yourself, have I died? And then obviously you came back into your body and then wondered why that happened. That's what happens. It's bizarre how I was in my teens when I had my first experience, or should I say was aware of. My mother used to say to me that I used to go downstairs when I was 10 and put all the lights and then come back to bed, and I had no knowledge of that. But that apparently is an out-of-body experience, which I've read many a time before. But I feel at that point you literally wanted to see yourself for who you are. And then obviously I feel that you might not have had another out-of-body experience since you was 14, and then you're probably wondering, why did I? So the question is it's in the answer really, is that you needed to know yourself. So your subconscious, I felt, that needed to see for who you was. And obviously you were starting in a new life from the age from going from a child into a young adult. I hope this answers your question, Samantha. What about you, Paul, on that?
Yeah, I think that sounds like a classic out-of-body experience. That's how Monroe started out.
Yeah.
Just kind of hovering in the air, whatever, over his body and saying, "Who's that down there?"
Yeah.
And so, so I think that's classic out-of-body. It's interesting to tie this in with near-death experiences. You hear similar accounts in a lot of the near-death experiences. Oftentimes in one of those events, they don't ever actually see a tunnel and go through a tunnel. They just end up out of their bodies in the room. And I suspect what this does is actually a combination of those two phenomena. It's an out-of-body experience that is induced by almost dying and then being revived. The classic, of course, near-death experience does then involve a conduit and going to another plane or dimension or whatever, and then being sent back. But some of the more basic NDEs probably really are out-of-body experiences just brought on by that immediate trauma.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that, because obviously when I do this experience with people who want to experience, obviously there is no near death. It's actual to me. It feels like it is actual. I suppose I'm inducing a more calmer approach to a near death experience. So there is no fear when they do. I mean, for example, my auntie, she had motor neurons, and basically she was dying, and she wanted to meet up with her husband who'd passed away a year earlier. So she had this experience 3 times, actually. She met up with him. And then when she was nearer to the end of her life, she said to her sister that I have no fear now, because she knows where she's going. So, yeah, it is a healing aspect, but it's also to explore what us humans are capable of doing. And like with the remote viewing, we are capable to discipline our minds enough to know about our intuition and tapping into it, I feel. So, yeah, I think remote viewing is an interesting concept in everyday life and for everybody to explore. We've got another question here, Don. Hello, Don. How are you?
Don, yes, we recognize him from our Facebook group, don't we? Yeah.
We do, yes.
So Don's question is, can either of us explain the steps needed to attempt ERV? Well, I guess it would probably be me. Do I need hemisync tapes? Do I need 2 people, or can I try it solo? Well, so first off, I do give an explanation of ERV on my website, which, if anyone's curious, that's RViewer, so RVIEWER.com. So RViewer.com. Up in the RV in depth tab, there's a description of ERV. There are ways to do it yourself. It's always helpful to have 2 people, but if you only have yourself, there are ways to do it yourself. But it would probably involve some kind of audio recording device so that you could debrief yourself as you're going. I don't know. This is a bit more complicated to answer than I think we can do here. Maybe we have a conversation offline or something, Dawn.
Yeah. Set up another group, maybe. Yeah. But I think the hemisync tapes, Don, like I say, I did the program, say 10 years ago with the Gateway program. Maybe you could try the Gateway program at the Monroe Institute. I think they do it over a weekend period now, so it's online because campus isn't open as yet. I dare say it's going to open hopefully in September, fingers crossed. Be notified. But I think if you try the actual Gateway program initially, because obviously you'll get the downloads anyways, you could try that. That might be something to explore.
Okay.
Would you say so, Paul?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good start. Yeah, it is a good start.
Okay. I can't pronounce it. Mayella, Melduna. Why when I go for an operations, I have the body experience?
So this is probably a function of anesthetic. I think what she's asking is when she goes to have an operation, which I presume she probably has general anesthetic for, she has an out-of-body experience.
Yes.
So sometimes anesthetic, of course, the idea is to deaden your conscious awareness so you don't experience the pain and discomfort. But I suspect what happens probably is, in a way, it also causes you to dissociate from your body. So maybe, I'm sorry, what do you call it? Your etheric body? Is that what you call it, Mandy?
Yeah. Yes.
So maybe your etheric body goes out of there when the body itself is no longer conscious and just kind of hangs around for a while. I don't know. It's hard to explain. Obviously, we'd have to know more about what you mean by your experience. But I would suspect that something like that is going on.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing being with that is it's like basically a body's, if you were theoretically stay in shock, and it's allowing your etheric to leave that physical vessel briefly while you can actually observe what the operation is about and observe what is actually happening to your physical body and what the operation has been performed upon, which would be quite unique to obviously to watch. Obviously when you're unconscious in your operation, you wake up and you're groggy, or you're not groggy for that matter, but wouldn't it be wonderful to observe? I would love to do that myself if that happened to me. I would anyway. I'd just pop out anyways and observe anyways to watch.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that would be interesting. Okay, so do social
That's good. And the answer is no. I mean, you're already technically socially distanced, but I have to tell you, I'll tell you a quick account of something that kind of shed some light on this question, which it's a joke, but it's serious. All right. My experience was serious. So I was tasked to remote view a Soviet particle beam weapon or some kind of projected energy weapon. Of course, in remote viewing, the thing you have to know is the viewer can't know what the target is. The viewer has to be totally blind to the target. And so you have to be psychic in two ways. You have to come to learn what the target is, and then in your subconscious does all this work. The subconscious has to come to understand what the target is and then direct your consciousness, your conscious awareness to that target. So this was in a Soviet research and development air defense site, and they were working on particle beam weapons there and other kinds of directed energy like lasers, high energy lasers and stuff. And my monitor directed me, through the process. I end up at the site and I say, well, there's this big machine here, this big device or apparatus, and something comes out of one end. And he said, well, I'll describe it. And I said, well, it's not tangible. It's like, and I didn't use the word energy. I can't remember what I said, but essentially I was saying that, right? It's not energy. He said, well, get in front of it. And I said, no, it's dangerous. Right? I'm not getting in front of that. He said, come on, you're not physically there. You're not going to be hurt by a physical thing. Get in front of it. Well, okay. And I got in front of it, and sure enough, it didn't hurt me. It was a very interesting experience because he kept working me down levels until the point where I must have reached close to the quantum level in my perception, because the things coming out of this stopped being the stream of energy, and it started being these little swirls in space. It's like there was something there yet with nothing there. And if I put my hand out, it would hit. I could feel it, but it just passed right through it, just with a little tingle or a tickle, and it was on the other side. So the only thing I can figure is I was at the quantum level, and I was experiencing this wave particle duality. I don't know, who knows what it really was exactly, but that seems plausible explanation. So yeah, you don't have to social distance. You're not going to get COVID from somebody you're remote viewing, right? So
only if you don't want to come back.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marty, for your question. Have we got any more questions? So, Paul, that's quite interesting when you mentioned the quantum level there. Obviously, that's saying your physical body is in the quantum field. And the strangest thing as well, when people pop out of the body, the physical vessel, some people say they felt like they were a statue. They can't move their arms or their legs or anything else like that when they were out of the body and looking back at themselves. And the first question they usually say to themselves, gosh, is that really me? Some say I need to lose weight, or my hair, I'm not sure about the hair colour. And I mean, you know yourself, you look at mirror, it's not you, is it? It's your physical you, yes. And the thing being with it is, they said, well, my body, the first question is, will my body be all right where it is? I said, yeah, we're going to leave your body there, and we're just going to pop out and step out where you need to go and who you need to meet. And this one gentleman at the Monroe Institute, he was really quite resistant. And I actually called him Velcro because he literally didn't want to come out, but he did at the same time. And I actually called him Velcro because he was having this battle with his etheric self, whether he wanted to do anyways. So when he finally popped out, as I called it, and we travelled to Rio de Janeiro, and he just went to all these carnivals. It was just like a revelation for him. And when I tried to get him back, could I get him back? He didn't want to come back. He really wanted to stay where he was. And I said, well, look, I give him more than 5 minutes. I think he must have had about 15 minutes, which obviously was quite a long time. And when he did come back, he just wanted to go back where he was. He felt like he just wanted to stay there. I said, well, it's not your time yet to go there. So for him, he had such an experience that it was profound upon himself. But on the lighter note of that is, when you think about popping, stepping, and slipping out, people thinking, "Crikey, is that what it's going to like when I pass? Is that what experience I will feel?" So it gives takes the fear away of literally of dying, but also you have the healing aspect of the physical vessel that's like you see in the field, and they just solidly feel like a statue. So that's quite unique, really, when I think that they've just know full well that the consciousness and the etheric body's away from the physical vessel, which is quite unique, I feel. Okay, we've got here Sherry Dyer. So what is the difference between astral travel and out of body, please? It's just a name. Everybody call it astral travel. They call it out of body experience. There's been, like you say, they call it flying. A lot of people call it flying. There's not really much difference of that. It's just astral travel is where you literally you're coming out of your physical vessel and you think you're going around in the universe and you're floating around in the universe. But obviously, what is the purpose? But the astral travel and the outer body to me is the same thing. Would you say that, Paul?
Well, I think that if not, they're very, very close relatives. Generally speaking, of course, my main familiarity with OBE is from the Monroe Institute, from Bob Monroe. He and I interacted a bit. Interesting guy, by the way. Maybe I'll have to tell you a story or two. But his experiences and a number of other accounts of OBEs tend to be kind of what I would say. It's not a completely accurate word, but I'd say more pragmatic. Right, they seem to be more tied to the terrestrial dimension. Like you may travel to other places in the world, you may travel to connect with other people that you're familiar with, that kind of thing. Although he did have what he called locale 2, which seemed to be another dimension, or kind of like the inverse of our world here, or at least an alternative version of it, whatever. Astral travel seems to be more associated with going into ethereal realms, right? Yeah. Going into some kind of spiritual dimensions that don't seem to be tied so much to the earth or to our physical domain, if you will, right? So, but in general, from what I've read of both, the experiences are very similar. It's just seemed like the perceived things that are visited, for want of a better term, seem to be a little bit oriented a little bit differently. Otherwise, I don't know that there is a difference beyond that.
I hope that answers your question, Sherry. Sharon, hello, Sharon. How are you? Is it possible to view past and future with remote viewing?
The answer is yes, with some caveats. So, remote viewing the present and the past seem to work about the same, or seem to be equally successful. Now, of course, in reality, there's no such thing as the present. All there is the present is essentially the very recent past, because we have this perceptual window that depending on your particular state of consciousness, is measured in fractions of a second. So whenever we perceive something, it's already happened about a fraction of a second before, right? So it's not present in the sense we think of present. It's still the very recent past. So if you're remote viewing the present, you're still essentially remote viewing the past, just not very, long ago past. But you can remote view past events as well. One of the, I call it a practice project we did at Fort Meade, was to test how well viewers could remote view the past. And remember, viewers have to be blind to the target. They can't know what the target is. They targeted us on Pearl Harbor, on the Pearl Harbor attack.
Wow.
And by the time we were done, most of us had reasonably well described aspects of that attack. And most of us had figured out it was probably Pearl Harbor, right? Wow. So, and that's, just one of many examples where we remote view into the past. The future is a little bit different. And I'm not going to explain how I come up with this statistic because it's a really kind of a seat of the pants statistic, but where roughly 70% of the time, probably between 60 and 80% of the time, a well-trained, experienced remote viewer will produce information that is evidence that they have indeed remote viewed successfully. Roughly half of that, so about 35% of the time, the results are really quite impressive, quite accurate. So, present and past.
Yeah. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah, present and past produce roughly those results. Future, it drops dramatically to maybe 5% of the time. Okay. Now, I think the reason for that is the future hasn't happened yet. I know there's people who believe we live in a block universe where the future and the past coexist at the same time, and all we are is consciousnesses moving along this fixed time spectrum, right? But the remote viewing evidence seems to contradict that. When you try and remote view what I call an open future, where when and where will the next terrorist event occur? Well, we seem to have very little success remote viewing those kinds of events, those kind of targets, those kind of things. Well, or for example, what course will my life take? XYZ, whatever, right? Those don't seem to work very well at all. And I think it's because the future doesn't happen. They're just decisions we make in this moment, things we do, things that happen, all that kind of stuff, determines to some degree what the future is. But each of those possible futures can be derailed or changed or altered by other things that happen in the course of that going on. Obviously, there's some of these things that are deterministic, which means they are going to happen just based on the state of affairs right now. I like to talk about earthquakes being something like that because, in fact, an earthquake, even though they seem random to us, they actually are deterministic. If a certain state of affairs exists right now in a certain location geologically, there will eventually be an earthquake as that thing unfolds. And so, in theory, you could be able to predict earthquakes much better because they're going to happen. So, yes, you can remote view the future. I've had some success doing it. There's a modality of remote viewing called associative remote viewing that actually brings your success rate up to equivalent to present or past. So roughly 70%, plus or minus 10% of someone who's doing it right, you'll have that high of a success rate. In a case where you should only be successful 50% of the time, you can be successful 60 to 80% of the time, roughly. But I think that's because it's a different mode. In a sense, well, this is too much to get into for this talk, and I'll just throw this out. I'll say, in a sense, what you're doing is picking an event and arranging it such that you have a similar deterministic causal chain that allows you to remote view that accurately, where some other future, essentially you're creating a specific future in that little narrow corner of the timeline. That's why ARV works. And I probably confused more people than I've unconfused with that brief answer, but my book, Essential Guide to Remote Viewing, I talk about that in there. So, yeah.
It's a really interesting book. You would really enjoy that book, everybody. Christopher Nemec, is there any truth to encountering your shadow self or other entities during an OBE? If so, please elaborate. Is there any truth about encountering your shadow? Your shadow self is your etheric self, okay? And other entities. The other entities are usually your family members or ancestors that you don't know that, but they know you. The thing being with that is when you say encountering of your shadow self is with you all the time. Yeah. So like you say, you go to bed at night, you have a dream and you come out of your physical vessel anyways, but you're not consciously aware of that. And you can meet people that you haven't seen for years. And all of a sudden you wake up, you go about your day, and then you meet up with that person. Okay. And you think, oh, I had a dream about you yesterday. I saw you in my dream. So you like feel it in my experience. You've actually perceived them in the first instance, like with remote viewing, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, where you can actually meet up with a person that you dreamt about the night before. So as you call them entities, it's usually is your ancestors that you don't know and literally that know you. That's what I'm sensing with this question. And this is what happens sometimes when given this opportunity for people who have had this experience, that they've met up with people they didn't know, but when they've asked family and such things, they find out that it's their great uncle John, for example. But like you say, the entities, this entity word to me refers to like extraterrestrial beings. All the experiences that I've offered for people all over the world have never come across anything that's called as an entity, like if you would say like ET or extraterrestrials or aliens for that matter. Nobody's actually ever come up with that in anything that they've actually experienced. So I think entities really broadens the horizon, that there's a possibility of extraterrestrials or such. With these experiences, nobody's actually said that they met up with an alien or, like I say, an extraterrestrial. It's usually another etheric self, like I say, the family member or an ancestor. And I dare say in the future, maybe they'll get to know who they all are, obviously with family trees and so forth. But the thing being with that, with like you're saying, with remote viewing, as Paul might state, when you talk about your shadow self, and Paul says you're actually in the room when you remote view, are you actually physically coming out of your physical vessel but not aware of it? Has that ever occurred to you, Paul, in remote viewing?
Well, that question's actually been asked quite a bit, and I don't think so. I think if you were coming out of your body, you'd be aware of it no matter what, right? I don't think that in a remote viewing setting you would have a false impression of where you actually were, right?
Okay.
So I do want to add to this. First of all, another book to recommend is Bob Monroe's Journeys Out of the Body. And that would answer your question, Christopher, if you read that book, because Bob encountered lots of entities in his experiences. Okay. So I'd say it's possible, depending on how you define things such as shadow self or other entities, but he seems to have probably answered that question in the affirmative. I do want to mention Christopher Niemak is also one of our group members. I'm glad to see him here, which gives me an opportunity to do another shout out. So this is for our remote viewing group. Those of you who are active on Facebook, I have a group called Remote Viewing, and then the slash mark, Remote Viewing / Remote Perception. It's a private group because we're trying to limit it strictly to remote viewing discussion. So there's also rules you have to agree to when you sign on, but they're all reasonable rules to help us keep our discussions on track. There are some other big remote viewing groups. They end up getting off into UFOs and cryptozoology and all kinds of stuff that really isn't remote viewing related. And we just want to have this as a remote viewing friendly group. So again, that's remote viewing with the slash mark, remote perception group on Facebook. And anybody's welcome there who wants to agree to those requirements.
Stay sure. I'm watching a Netflix based on a boy out of a 12-year coma who spent his coma living another life in another world. Is this possible for coma patients to have alternate remote viewing or OBE lives?
I'd say, who knows, right? We can imagine lots of things. Most coma patients that I'm familiar with don't have any recollection of any particular experience unless they were actually conscious but unable to communicate when they were presumed to be in a coma. can't imagine anything to be more horrible than that. But generally speaking, I don't think we have any record at all of people actually having these kind of alternate lives while they're in a coma. Doesn't mean it's not possible. It could be they had them and then just forgot when they came out of it, or maybe it's just a thing that some screenwriter thought sounded like a cool idea. We don't know.
Or maybe it's a past life that the boy is actually living from a past life, from his consciousness, from another time. Yeah, there is a possibility that's possibly where he's actually been in the first instance, in my eyes, that he could have been living in a past life when he had obviously no coma and no illness, if you will. So that's where I'm feeling with that one. I hope that helps you, Stace. It's interesting, really. There's, like you say, Netflix do fetch out a lot of programs about possibilities of doing different things or traveling different places. And like you say, with the remote viewing also, which is very interesting, really, because I feel like it exercises the mind. There you go, Ray. There you go, Paul Richard Dearden.
How long does it take to get the viewing down? I presume what you mean by that is how long before you start becoming proficient. And I'd say that varies with the person, but generally speaking, when we were at Fort Meade, we started off taking 18 months to get good at it. But there was a lot of reasons for that, including distractions caused by the Army bureaucracy. When we finally got our whole process down, we were starting to use viewers operationally after about 3 months of training and practice. But again, that's kind of a day job, right? That's what they're doing every day, not just, it's not something they do just as a hobby on the side, for example, whatever. I have found that in my basic course, it's 5.5 days long. And by the time my students are done with the basic course, they can remote view at a general basic level, hence the name of the course. And I encourage them to keep practicing. They do 10 homeworks for me, that they do the homework, send it to me, I score it, send it back with another target to do, and we do that 10 times. So that helps cement their skills. But I encourage them to continue practicing even beyond that, because the key to this, just like playing the violin, is you get the right instruction and then you practice to really get good, right? So let's say you were in a real hurry and you had unlimited time and resources. You wanted to become an operationally competent, which means you can do real world problems, solve real world problems, work for police, whatever, right? That would involve getting at least up through the intermediate course and plenty of practice. You could probably become useful operational sense in about probably, I don't know, 3 months if you could apply yourself like that. Again, kind of like what we did. Associative remote viewing is a different story. All you need to do is have a rudimentary ability to do remote viewing, and you could work in an associative remote viewing project, because you don't have to be a really good remote viewer. You just have to be reasonably accurate in your perceptions. No, let me put it this way. You don't have to be an advanced remote viewer. You just have to be reasonably accurate so that a judge can determine which target you're describing. And without explaining ARV, I can't, you're probably not going to understand that. But nonetheless, if you want to do ARV, you can do it quickly with just a relatively small amount of training and experience. If you want to become a full-blown operational viewer, it's just like become a psychologist. You got to do a lot of stuff, right? And so, but I think you could become useful in maybe about 3 months of really concerted, dedicated effort.
Good question there, Richard. It's interesting. Okay. Good. Okay. Paul, you go first.
Well, I want to say, all of you who've joined and all of you who've asked questions, much obliged. Really appreciated the opportunity to talk with you all in this relatively limited format, but great questions, and I'm absolutely sure there are probably a bunch more good questions out there that we just unfortunately don't have time for. So I much appreciate it. You can always join the remote viewing / remote perception Facebook group and ask those questions there, and I'm sure you'll get some useful answers. But yes, thank you so much, Mandy. Thank you and Richard for this opportunity, and thank those of you who joined in, because you're the ones that make it worthwhile.
Thank you, Paul. I want to thank Paul for joining me this evening and for Richard giving me the opportunity. I want to thank all you guys who's been on the group tonight and enjoyed it. And obviously, like I say, being Mandy Paul, I'm a spiritual medium and a healer, and obviously an out-of-body facilitator. So if you want to have this experience, get in touch with me on Facebook, or I've got my email address, which is mandy.paul@live.co.uk. So hopefully we'll maybe do another show in the future, Paul, if you're interested.
Sure.
And yeah, thank you for joining.
You're welcome.